The rain poured down in relentless sheets, hammering the deserted city streets in the dead hush of a 2 a.m. storm. Water gushed along the gutters, carving miniature rivers that surged toward overflowing storm drains, their mouths gaping beneath. The flickering glow of dying street lamps, the city, usually alive even at this hour, now held its breath beneath the weight of the storm save for a lone figure. Stumbling down the glistening sidewalk, Chen 37, polished, poised, and CEO of the billion-dollar tech empire Chen looked nothing like the commanding executive she'd been just hours ago. Her designer heels clacked unevenly on the slick pavement, one broken from earlier missteps, and her high-end evening gown clung to her body, saturated with rain and heartbreak. The news at the business dinner had hit her like a blow to the chest. Her ex-husband was getting remarried. He had moved on, completely and without her. And suddenly, all her power, all her money, all her brilliance couldn't shield her from the hollowness in her chest. The wine she had downed afterward numbed her mind, but not her sorrow, her world, so carefully constructed from corporate conquests and emotional distance, felt like it was crumbling with each squelching step. The rain mingled with her silent tears as she staggered forward, barely able to recognize where she was heading, thinking it might be toward her car. Though her vision blurred too much to confirm anything, she was adrift, a sole UNMOO or ED dot across the street. Michael Torres was finishing the same humble routine he'd followed for 5 steady years, shutting down his modest auto repair shop, the metal gate groaning as he pulled it down with callous hands. At 38, Michael was the kind of man who bore the quiet dignity of someone who lived simply and worked hard. Grease-stained hands, weathered jeans, and a deeply ingrained humility defined him far more than his fading work shirts ever could. Every long or he toiled was for one reason alone: his 8-year-old daughter, Anna. But on this storm-drenched night, something pierced his rhythm, a loud splash, a figure falling. His heart thumped sharply as he turned toward the sound and spotted a woman collapsing into the gutter water, struggling against the current near the storm drain. Without a second thought, Michael shrugged on his worn jacket and sprinted into the street, his boots slapping against the pavement. He reached her just as she tried to rise, drenched and shivering. As he knelt beside her, the rain cascading off the brim of his cap, he saw her face partially hidden by shadows and soaked hair, and something about her struck him, a vague familiarity he couldn't place. But it didn't matter. She was a stranger in need. "Are you okay, miss?" he asked gently, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders and shielding her from the worst of the downpour. With his body, Diana looked up at him through the haze of wine, sorrow, and cold, and saw a stranger with kind eyes and the kind of hands that told stories of hard work, not spreadsheets. The streetlight flickered behind him, casting his face in and out of light. She squinted, trying to focus, but the world tilted sideways again. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice nearly lost to the rhythm of falling rain. I can't." Her words dissolved. Her body gave in. The exhaustion, the alcohol, the sorrow, it all swept her into darkness. As her world faded, she felt strong arms lifting her effortlessly. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. Michael stood still for a moment, holding the unconscious woman, her soaked designer gown cold against his chest. He stared at her face again, that same nonsense that he'd seen her somewhere before, tugging at his memory. But there was no time for thinking. He turned back toward his shop and carried her into the warm, dry safety of the modest apartment above. Morning light filtered through thin curtains, washing the small living space in soft gold. Diana woke slowly, her body aching, her mind groggy. She blinked against the light and found herself curled on a modest couch, covered by a faded but clean quilt that smelled faintly of soap, and something else, something that whispered of comfort and home. Her fingers brushed the fabric instinctively, and she sat up, taking in her surroundings. The apartment was humble, with mismatched furniture that had clearly been collected over time, each piece with its own story, its own scars. But it was spotless. Everything was placed with care. She could hear the gentle sounds of life, dishes clinking, the low hum of traffic outside, footsteps that didn't feel threatening but grounding. Her head throbbed, not just from the wine, but from the shame that crept up her throat. No amount of corporate polish could protect her from this raw, unfamiliar vulnerability. "Good morning," came a voice from the doorway. She turned, startled, and there he was, her rescuer. In the daylight, he looked even more grounding, tall, weathered in the way only life could shape a man, silver threaded through the dark at his temples, his shirt tucked into worn jeans. His presence was gentle, solid, and his eyes held a quiet warmth that made something flutter in her chest. "I'm Michael," he said simply, setting a mug of coffee on the table beside her. "Michael Torres. I run the auto shop just across the street. Found you last night, soaked and unconscious. I hope it's okay I brought you here. I didn't know where else to take you." Diana opened her mouth to speak, gratitude rising like a tide, but before she could respond, a small voice broke the moment. "Daddy, is the pretty lady feeling better?" A little girl, maybe 8 years old, peeked shyly from behind Michael's legs. Her dark hair was tied into pigtails and even, slightly messy, with remnants of breakfast around her mouth and joy shining in her eyes. Michael's face softened immediately. "This is Anna," he said, his pride unmistakable. Anna approached, clutching the crayon drawing 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a rainbow. She offered it to Diana with the open-hearted generosity only children knew how to give. "I made this for you, so you feel better," she said shyly. Diana felt something shatter quietly inside her. The dam she hadn't known was there gave way. Her throat tightened as she reached for the drawing, blinking rapidly. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful." But inside, she was spiraling. Anna looked so much like her daughter, her own child, who would have been the same age if she had lived. The ghost of that loss stirred beneath her ribs, and for a moment, Diana thought she might break entirely. Later, dressed in borrowed clothes and her dignity pieced back together as best she could, Diana stood at the door, her fingers tightening around the strap of her purse. She was ready to leave, but her feet felt heavy. The idea of returning to her pristine penthouse, her endless schedule, her sculpted loneliness, it suddenly felt unbearable. She turned to Michael. "Thank you for everything. Truly, you didn't have to do any of this." He shrugged, his kindness unassuming. "You looked like you needed help. That's all." She pressed a business card into his palm. "I'm Diana Chen," she said softly, watching his face for any flicker of recognition. There was none, only the same quiet decency. "If you ever need anything, really, anything at all." Her voice trailed as she looked around the apartment. One last time at Anna's drawings on the fridge, at the chipped dishes carefully stacked, at the worn couch that had held her more gently than anything had in years. "Maybe I could take you both to dinner sometime," she added. As a thank you, Michael smiled, not because he needed anything from her, but because in that moment, something passed between them. Not promises, not expectations, just something true. And for the first time in a long time, Diana felt like maybe, just maybe, life was giving her a second chance. Michael offered a quiet smile and a small nod, but Diana could see it in his eyes. He was the kind of man who lived humbly and wore his discomfort plainly when faced with extravagance. An expensive dinner wasn't a reward to him, but something foreign, perhaps even unsettling. Still, he accepted her thanks with that same unassuming grace. As she stepped toward the door, preparing to return to her well-appointed but lonely world, a small pair of arms suddenly wrapped around her legs. Anna, the child, hugged her tightly, without hesitation or reserve. And in that instant, Diana felt a piercing ache so sharp it stole her breath of phantom pain. The echo of an embrace she would never feel again, the memory of her own daughter, lost too soon, rose like a wave and threatened to drown her right. There, in the days that followed, something unexpected happened. Diana began to find reasons, small, believable excuses, to pass by the little auto shop tucked on the corner of that quiet street. She started bringing coffee always black with just a hint of cream, the way she liked it. Eventually, she added small surprises for Anna, a box of crayons, a book, a scarf with little stars. She told herself they were just gestures of gratitude, nothing more, but they were so much more. She discovered things. That Michael brewed his coffee exactly the way she did, that he preferred silence over idle chatter, but when he spoke, his words were thoughtful and precise, as if each one mattered. And that Anna, bright-eyed and endlessly curious, was startlingly intelligent for her age. The child's endless questions were like sunlight through dusty blinds. Why do you wear those shoes? Do you like your job? Why don't you smile more? Diana found herself answering them all, and in doing so, she felt parts of herself she thought long buried stir back to life. Michael would watch these exchanges with a quiet, amused smile, adding the occasional wry remark, and always listening more than he spoke. His silences didn't make her uneasy. In fact, they felt like an invitation to breathe, to rest, to simply be. There was a rhythm to it, all a familiar, soul-deep rhythm that Diana hadn't realized she missed, like a melody she once knew by heart, but hadn't heard in years. Then, one rainy afternoon, she walked into the shop and stopped in her tracks. Soft jazz floated from a weathered radio in the corner, its notes drifting through the air like ghosts. It was a Love Supreme Coltrane's masterpiece, a song she hadn't heard since college, yet one that had been a sacred part of her younger years. The soundtrack to dreams once bold and unbroken. You like jazz? She asked softly, eyes scanning the cluttered room now tainted with memory. Michael looked up from beneath the hood of a rusted sedan, a bit sheepish. Helps me think, he said, wiping his hands clean. My father used to play it. Guess it's stuck. I used to love jazz, she murmured, almost to herself, as she perched on a nearby stool. Feels like a lifetime ago. And so they sat, in the warm quiet, the saxophone weaving between them like threads stitching the separate lives into one fabric. They didn't need to speak. The music spoke enough. It was Anna who eventually became the bridge to living, breathing connection between Diana's tightly wound world and the quiet sanctuary that had unfolded in this modest garage apartment. One afternoon, Anna pulled out a school assignment and asked Diana for help. We have to do a project about successful women, she said brightly, and I picked you. They worked side by side at the small kitchen table, surrounded by colored paper, pencils, and the smell of reheated soup. Diana spoke of her journey of growing up poor, of fighting for scholarships, of clawing her way into boardrooms filled with dismissive men. But slowly, her words shifted. She found herself speaking not just of her triumphs, but her regrets. The friendships she had lost along the way, the families she had grown distant from, the quiet, aching price of ambition. Anna looked up at her, head tilted, eyes impossibly wise. Did you ever have a little girl like me? Diana's breath caught. Her voice trembled. I did, she whispered, once, but she's not with me anymore. Anna blinked slowly, then reached across the table and placed her tiny hand over Diana's. Maybe she sent me to be your friend, she said simply, with the unwavering faith that only children possess. Diana excused herself and locked herself in the bathroom, the tears falling faster than she could stop them. She sobbed silently, heart cracking open under the weight of that innocent kindness. And so time moved, not in great sweeping arcs, but in quiet moments of shared smile. A repaired fuse box, a story exchanged over coffee. She started noticing the details, how Michael always stirred his cup 3 times counterclockwise, how he hummed a certain tune while working, the same tune every time, how his eyes creased when he laughed at Anna's jokes. It all felt familiar, disarmingly familiar. More than once, Diana found herself staring at him across the shop, struck by a strange sense of déjà vu. Something about the slope of his jaw when the sunlight struck just right, the way his voice softened when he said her name. And then it happened. A Tuesday afternoon, the sky overcast. Anna spilled her chocolate milk all over her school uniform and burst into tears with the wild, full-bodied despair only children can summon. Michael knelt beside her, gentle and patient, humming that same melody as he wiped the mess, and Diana froze. That tune, that melody, It wasn't a real song. It was a lullaby, a made-up lullaby. She had created it herself in the quiet corners of her college dorm, humming it during sleepless nights and fragile mornings. Only one person had ever known it. Only one person had hummed it back to her, like a promise. Her voice came out of breath. Michael Torres from State University. He looked up slowly, their eyes locked. The silence between them cracked open like thunder. Diana, he said, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. He stood, stunned, as if movement might shatter. The fragile recognition between them. Double quotes Diana Chen. I can't believe. 15 years of silence, of loss, of detours and diverging roads, collapsed into that single, blazing moment of remembrance. She was no longer the wide-eyed girl in second-hand sweaters who had dreamed of changing the world. He was no longer the idealistic young man who had sketched his future with her at his side. They had both changed. Time had etched lines into their faces, carved weariness into their bones. But something essential had remained untouched. The spark, the understanding, the unfinished song. They stood in the middle of a small kitchen, surrounded by spilled chocolate milk, half-finished homework, and the soft breathing of a child who had unknowingly led them back to each other. And somehow, in all of it, in the jazz, in the memories, in the quiet warmth of being seen, they found the beginnings of something neither had dared hope for. A second chance. I look for you, Michael murmured, his voice thick with the weight of 15 years' worth of silence, aching regret, and memories too painful to name. After graduation, when your world started crumbling, your father's illness, your sudden disappearance, I tried to find you. I searched everywhere, but you were gone. No phone number, no address. It was like you'd vanished from the face of the earth. Diana's eyes filled with tears, her heart twisting as the weight of those lost years came rushing back like a tidal wave. That time had nearly broken her. Her father's diagnosis had been devastating. Her family's financial collapse swift and merciless. And then there was the scholarship abroad, a lifeline thrown into stormy waters. She clung to it, even though it meant letting go of the only man she had ever truly loved. I couldn't ask you to wait, she whispered, her voice trembling under the weight of what could have been. You had your own dreams, your own life ahead of you. I didn't want to be the anchor that held you back. They inched toward one another like the stars drawn by some cosmic pull, irresistible and unspoken. When Michael reached out, his callous hand brushing her cheek, she leaned into his palm instinctively. Like a flower turning to the warmth of sunlight, the years fell away, replaced by something that felt ancient and eternal. But before the moment could deepen, a small voice chimed in with childlike curiosity. Daddy, why are you and Miss Diana crying? They turned to see Anna standing a few feet away, her head tilted, her bright eyes watching them with the solemn intensity only children possess when trying to interpret the complexities of adult emotions. Michael crouched to her level and gently took her tiny hands into his. Miss Diana and we knew each other a long time ago. He explained softly. Back before you came to live with me, we were very close. Anna's brow furrowed thoughtfully. Were you boyfriend and girlfriend, like in the movies? The question cracked the tension, and both adults laughed through their tears. Sorrow and joy tangled in equal measure. Something like that, sweetheart, Diana replied with a smile, kneeling beside Michael to meet Anna's gaze. Your daddy was once very important to me. Anna nodded, absorbing this information seriously before her face lit up with a sudden, delighted idea. Maybe you can be important to each other again. There was such innocent certainty in her voice, such wholehearted belief in love's ability to find its way, that neither adult could offer anything in reply but a stunned smile. As days turned into weeks, Diana found herself increasingly drawn to the small family that had unknowingly become her anchor. Michael's steady presence grounded her, while Anna's joyful spirit filled the quiet rooms of her heart she hadn't dared visit in years. And yet, something began to stir in Diana, a whisper, a suspicion, a fragile, impossible hope. She began to notice little things about Anna, details that caught her breath and made her heart ache in ways she couldn't quite explain. The scar on her chin, which Anna had mentioned came from a childhood fall off a swing, a crescent-shaped birthmark on her shoulder. Familiar mannerisms, how the girl tilted her head when thinking, how she hummed softly while coloring, the way she laughed like wind chimes caught in a spring breeze. These things weren't just familiar, they were haunting, and Diana, though afraid of where her thoughts were leading, began to study Anna more closely when she thought no one was looking. Every detail, every trait, every echo of memory felt like a mirror reflecting something long lost. The truth revealed itself gently, yet it shattered everything. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. Sunlight poured through the window in slanted ribbons as Anna showed Diana her small box of treasures. Inside were seashells and pebbles, dried flowers tucked inside old books, and at the very bottom, handled with the reverence of something sacred, was a small silver bracelet. "This is my most special thing," Anna said, her voice proud and soft, holding it up so the light danced off the metal. "It has my real name on it, Grace. Daddy says it means I'm supposed to be graceful like a dancer." Diana's hands trembled as she took the bracelet. Her breath caught, her vision blurred, etched into the surface in delicate, unmistakable script were the words, "Grace Chen, Mommy's little star." Her world tilted violently. She had given that bracelet to her daughter on her 3rd birthday just weeks before. She had vanished from a bustling shopping mall, snatched away in the space of a single distracted moment. One call, one business emergency, 1 second along. Where did your daddy find you?" she asked, her voice brittle with the effort of holding herself together. Anna nestled closer to her, unaware of the storm building inside the woman beside her. "At the big shopping center with the fountain," she said casually. "I was crying, 'cause I couldn't find my mama. Daddy said I was just sitting there alone, so he bought me ice cream and promised to take care of me until my mama came back." She looked up at Diana with pure, unguarded trust. "But she never did," Anna finished simply, "so Daddy became my real daddy. The nice lady at the government office said I could stay with him forever, because he loves me so much." Diana excused herself without explanation and stumbled blindly into the bathroom. She collapsed onto the edge of the tub, her body racked with sobs. Years of mourning, of unanswered questions, of guilt that had hollowed her from the inside out, all poured from her in wave after wave of broken grief. Her daughter, her baby, not only alive, but safe, cherished, loved deeply by the man who had once held Diana's heart in the palm of his hand. The sheer gravity of the coincidence was almost too much to bear. But beneath the disbelief, beneath the flood of memories and sorrow, bloomed something bright and soul-deep joy. Raw, unfiltered, sacred joy. When she finally emerged, her eyes red, but her spirit lighter than it had been in years, she found Michael waiting. He rose quickly, concern etched in every line of his face. "Diana, what is it? What's wrong?" She drew in a trembling breath, trying to summon words for something that felt beyond language. "Michael," she said slowly, the syllables heavy with the truth she was about to unveil. "5 years ago, I lost my daughter. She was 3. Her name was Grace Chen. She disappeared from Westfield Mall while I was on a business call. I turned away, and when I turned back, she was gone. All I had left was that bracelet." She held it out in trembling hands, and as he looked down at the familiar piece of silver, as the words sank in, realization spread across his face like sunlight breaking through clouds. His knees gave out, and he sank into a chair, eyes wide with shock. "Oh my God," he whispered, as the impossible truth became reality. In that moment, everything changed, not with fanfare or thunderclaps, but with the quiet, powerful weight of love finding its way back home. "Oh my God," Michael whispered, his voice caught somewhere between disbelief and heartbreak. "Diana, I had no idea. All this time, she's been..." He turned toward the kitchen, where the soft hum of a child's tune floated in from the other room. Anna was sitting cross-legged at the table, happily coloring, oblivious to the seismic shift occurring just a few feet away. "She's your daughter," Michael said, as if saying it aloud would make the impossible truth any easier to comprehend. "I've been raising your daughter, but the joy of their reunion, the miraculous." Once-in-a-lifetime moment of reconnection was heartbreakingly short-lived. Only days after they had unearthed the truth of Anna's origins, a shadow from Diana's past walked straight into the present. Her ex-husband, Richard Wu. He arrived unannounced at Michael's auto shop, dressed in a tailored suit that looked more like armor than attire. His smile was slick, cold, and calculated, predatory. The kind of grin that said he was there to take something. He watched Michael work, eyes glittering with condescension, as he lowered himself into a chair without invitation. "This is quite the story," Richard began, his tone casual, but his intent razor-sharp. A humble mechanic unknowingly adopts the missing daughter of a tech billionaire. Then how convenient he just happens to reunite with his old college sweetheart, who turns out to be the child's biological mother. He leaned back, savoring the moment. The media would eat this up. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. And then came the demand. Hush money. Richard, it seemed, had hired a private investigator under the guise of concern for Diana's erratic post-divorce behavior. But what he'd really discovered was gold, scandalous, headline-worthy gold. And now he wanted payment to stay quiet, a large one, for his new wife's lifestyle maintenance, he claimed. But money wasn't the only weapon he wielded. He insinuated that Michael might face legal scrutiny for adopting a child who had once been listed as missing, even though everything about the adoption had been above board and legally sound. Richard was quick to twist the truth. The authorities might wonder, he said with mock concern, why you didn't try harder to find her biological family. It could look negligent, or worse. Michael's hands froze mid-wrench, the weight of the threat sinking deep into his chest. He could lose everything, not just his daughter, but his freedom, and all for doing the only thing he knew how to do, love a child who had needed him. What followed was a slow unraveling of trust, of peace, of the fragile sanctuary the three of them had started to build. The stress bled into every corner of their lives. Diana and Michael, once moving toward each other with the certainty of destiny, began drifting apart in fear. Each tried to protect the other and Anna in their own way, but their good intentions quickly tangled into misunderstandings. Desperate to contain the damage, Diana met privately with Richard. She agreed to his demands, paid him off in exchange for his silence. The deal left her feeling tainted, small, like she was back in the worst days of their marriage, where control passed hands like currency. Meanwhile, Michael sought legal counsel, and the news wasn't comforting. Cases involving wealthy parents, especially those with media interests, rarely stayed private, and children, no matter how protected, were always the ones who suffered most under the spotlight. Then, in a moment clouded by panic and an overwhelming need to shield the man she loved, Diana made a decision she would come to regret with every fiber of her being. She showed up at Michael's apartment one evening, papers in hand and her expression guarded. "I think," she began, her voice wooden, "I think it's best if Anna comes to stay with me for a while, just until things settle legally." She couldn't meet his eyes. Her explanation felt rehearsed, hollow. She spoke of lawyers, media damage control, protection. She framed it as a temporary arrangement. But Michael saw through her words. He heard the fear in them, the sacrifice. The moment shattered them both. Anna, bewildered by the sudden tension between the two adults she trusted most, clung to Michael's leg with desperation in her eyes. "I don't want to go, Daddy," she cried, the word daddy cutting through the room like glass. It had never been recognized on paper, but it had been etched into her heart. "I want to stay home, please. Don't make me go. Why can't Miss Diana live here with us instead?" she added, her innocence slicing through adult logic with heartbreaking clarity. Michael knelt in front of her, his heart breaking as he held her close. Sometimes grown-ups have to make really hard choices to keep the people they love safe, he said, voice trembling. "Miss Diana is your real mama, and she wants to take care of you the same way I have." But Anna was too young to understand the sharp edges of custody battles and legal threats. All she knew was that she was being taken away from the only home she had ever known, and from the man who had kissed her bruises, tucked her in and called her pumpkin every night since she was 3. Her cries of "But you're my daddy" echoed through the apartment like a requiem, and when Diana led her away, the silence that followed was the kind that leaves scars. The days that followed were a kind of living purgatory. Anna, pulled from the only safe haven she had ever known, grew silent, withdrawn. She refused to eat, refused to smile. She sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows of Diana's penthouse, staring out as if her longing could somehow bridge the miles back to the modest apartment that had once been her world. And Diana, despite having everything she had once dreamed of, was miserable. Her daughter was home, yes, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Her penthouse, with its gleaming surfaces and million-dollar view, felt cold and lifeless compared to Michael's cluttered, love-soaked apartment. She had wanted to reclaim her role as a mother, but instead, she had destroyed the fragile family they had been building. In trying to protect, she had only wounded. The final breaking point came late one night. Anna had developed a fever. Her small body, fragile from stress and upheaval, burned hot beneath her sheets, and in her sleep, she called out not for Diana, but for Daddy. Over and over. "Daddy, take me home. I want to go home, Daddy." Diana sat beside her, brushing damp strands of hair from her daughter's flushed forehead, and felt something inside her give way. The dam of denial, of fear, of pride, it all crumbled. Tears slid down her cheeks as she listened to her daughter plead through fevered dreams to return to the man who had raised her, loved her, protected her. In that moment, Diana finally, fully understood love isn't about biology. It isn't about winning. It's not about control. It's about home. And for Anna, home had always been with Michael. She had approached it like any other crisis, through the lens of control, logic, and legal strategy. Diana had treated the pain as a problem to be solved, contracts signed, reputations protected, custody arranged with clinical precision. But none of that. No court ruling, no fortress of wealth or influence could offer what Anna truly needed. The little girl didn't need legal protection from public scrutiny. She needed the unshakable comfort of a family held together not by fear, but by love. It was only then, sitting in the hush of her penthouse beside her fevered daughter, listening to her cry out in sleep for the father she'd been taken from, that Diana finally understood love wasn't about ownership or titles. It wasn't about who had the better lawyers or whose name was on the birth certificate. Love was about choosing what was right, even when it wasn't easy, even when it meant letting go. The next morning, just after dawn, Diana wrapped Anna gently in a blanket, bundled her into the car, and drove across the city. The sun was rising slowly, painting the sky with soft streaks of gold. As they pulled into the cracked driveway of Michael's auto shop, she found him inside, hunched under the hood of a car, his movements mechanical, his heart clearly elsewhere. "She's been asking for you," Diana said quietly. Michael's head snapped up, and then he saw her. Not Diana, but Anna. In her arms. And everything else fell away. In an instant, Anna reached for him, her small arms outstretched like they were being pulled by the gravity of love. Michael dropped his tools and ran to her, gathering her into his arms as if to make sure she was real and whole in his again. The moment was so tender, so filled with aching relief, that Diana had to turn away, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking as she watched Michael hold his daughter, and felt the weight of everything her fear had nearly cost them. "I was so afraid of losing her again that I'd almost destroyed what she needed most." Later that afternoon, the three of them sat around the small, scuffed kitchen table in Michael's apartment. No lawyers, no paperwork, just three people bound by love and pain and the hope of healing. This time, they didn't speak as opposing sides in a battle, they spoke as one. "She needs both of us," Diana said gently, watching as Anna sat between them, coloring peacefully, her small fingers smudged with crayon and joy. "Not me instead of you, both of us, together." She looked up at Michael, her voice trembling with sincerity. "I don't want to be the mother who comes in and disrupts the life you built. I want to be a part of the family you've already created." Michael's eyes softened, and he reached across the table to take her hand. His grip was strong, steady like it had been all those years ago. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. "Together, all of us, as a family." The house they chose wasn't his cramped apartment, nor her cold, glittering penthouse. It was something entirely new, a quaint, sun-warmed craftsman bungalow on a quiet street with a garden in the back where Anna could chase butterflies, and a small garage where Michael could run his shop from home. Diana left her position as CEO of Chen, transitioning to chair of the board. It gave her freedom she hadn't known in decades, freedom to wake up with the sun, to pack school lunches, to show up for piano recitals and bedtime stories. It was the first time in years she wasn't building an empire, but a life. The adjustment wasn't seamless. They had arguments. They stumbled over parenting styles, disagreed on curfews and screen time and how many cookies were acceptable before dinner. But every decision, every late-night whisper and hard-earned compromise was rooted in one shared promise: Anna comes first. On a dewy Saturday morning in spring, Diana woke to the gentle sound of jazz drifting from the kitchen, a soft, familiar melody that once reminded her of who she used to be. She followed it barefoot down the hallway and found Michael at the stove, humming as he poured coffee into mismatched mugs. Anna sat at the table, pencil in hand, nose scrunched in concentration over her homework. For a moment, Diana stood in the doorway, afraid to move, afraid that the spell might shatter if she did. But then Anna looked up and beamed, leaping from her chair and wrapping her arms around Diana's legs. "Mama," she chirped, "Daddy says we can plant flowers today if I finish my math." Diana's heart swelled. The word mama, once foreign on the child's tongue, had slowly taken root, and now bloomed without hesitation, natural, effortless, as though she had always been mama. Their wedding was quiet, a simple ceremony at the courthouse with just the three of them. Anna served as both flower girl and ring bearer, her small face radiant with joy. The judge who married them commented that he'd never seen a family more clearly in love. That evening, they celebrated with spaghetti and laughter at Michael's favorite Italian restaurant, the same one where he used to bring Anna during their simpler, harder years. Now, they returned as three, but the bond that joined them had deepened into something timeless. Later, after dessert and sleepy hugs, they tucked Anna into bed. She lay between her parents, eyes heavy but voice serious. "I'm glad you found each other again," she whispered, "and I'm glad you found me, too, even if it took a long time, and even if you were sad for a while." She reached out with her small hands and placed them on their cheeks. "Now we're together, like we're supposed to be." That night, after she fell asleep, Diana and Michael sat on the porch swing they had installed in the front yard. The stars stretched wide above them, and the warm breeze carried the scent of spring blossoms. They held hands in silence, both reflecting on how the world had conspired through grief, coincidence, and quiet miracles to bring them back to each other. Sometimes, Diana thought, the universe doesn't forget. Sometimes it waits until hearts are soft enough to heal, until time has sanded down old wounds, until love no longer wears the armor of fear. And sometimes it sends a child not just to be found, but to lead the way. She had once thought her story was about loss, but in truth, it had always been about finding her way home. And this time, she wasn't walking alone.